Baron Trump's Marvelous Underground Journey. Chapter 30. All about the most terrible but magnificent ride I ever took in my life. 90 miles on the back of a flying mass of ice, and how Boger and I were landed at last on the banks of a most wonderful river. How the day broke in this underworld. The tropics of the underworld seem to be the little baron on the left, Boger on the right. They are standing while Boger's sitting, with a guy sitting on a ledge or stair before probably a cliff, and he casts a shadow on the wall. It seems they are on a shore and the water's full of ice, and I think that's supposed to be a sun, but we'll find out. Had my hand at that moment not grasped a cord tied to the neck of my wise and keen-eyed Boger, I really believe I would have come to a halt, faced about, retraced my steps, and begged the inhabitants of this crystal realm to admit me once more into the cold kingdom where Gelitis held his icy court. For a sudden fit of depression came upon me as the chilly air struck against my cheeks, and I saw the deep darkness made visible by the tiny flame of my alabaster lamp. Cold though it might be, I would have sunshine in the icy land of the Culticorpse. But now how could I tell what fate awaited me? Luckily, I asked the captain of the meat quarries to allow me to retain one of his sounding rods with its flint point, for I feared lest in descending some icy declivity I might fall and bruise, or even break a limb. I was determined to advance cautiously along this icy passage, shrouded as it was in impenetrable gloom, and so different from the broad and polished pavements of the marble highway, and hence, hanging the lamp about my neck, I proceeded to make use of the sounding rod as an alpenstock, for which purposes it was admirably adapted. Suddenly, Boger halted, gave a low whine of warning, and turned back. In an instant, I knew that there was danger ahead, and letting myself drop on my hands and knees, crawled carefully along to make an investigation of the dangerous spot in our route, signaled by the watchful Boger. It was only too true. We stood apparently at the very edge of a sheer parapet. How high I had no way of ascertaining, but I was unable to reach any bottom with the sounding rod. What was to be done? Turn back? It was not yet too late. The Culticorpian quarrymen could not have completed their task in so short a time. They would hear my knock. They would tear down their wall of ice, and Gelitis and Schneebel would welcome us back to their ice palace with a cold but honest satisfaction. As I sat there, plunged in thought, I half unconsciously began to twirl the sounding rod around until I had sunk it half its length into the floor of ice. And then, reaching out, I encircled Boger with my arm and drew him up against me, as was my wont when preparing for profound meditation. I'd scarcely done so when the ice beneath me gave one of those sharp, clear, cracking noises, so unlike the sound made by the breaking of any other substance, and thereupon I felt the crystal mass on which Boger and I were sitting tremble and vibrate for an instant, and then, with a sudden downward cant, break away from the mass behind it and begin to move. Instinctively, a sense of my awful peril prompted me to cling to the sounding rod, which I'd sunk, drill-like, into the ice. Luckily, it was between my legs, and quick as a flash, I entwined them around it, assuming a Turkish sitting posture, while my left arm was wrapped tightly around Bulger's body. I don't know how it was done as it was, all in an instant, but there I sat, now firmly saddled, so to speak, upon that crystal monster's back. As with a creak and a crash, it snapped the crystal links, which bound it to the wall of ice and plunged headlong down the glassy slope. In my fright, I had dropped my lamp, and now the deep gloom of this underworld enwrapped me. But no, it was not so, for as the escaping block of ice creaked and crunched its way along, the two cold crystal surfaces gave forth a weird glimmer of phosphorescent light, which made the flying mass seem like a monstrous living thing, out of whose 1,000 eyes were darting tongues of flame as it rushed madly along, now gaining speed upon striking a steeper stretch of way, now fouling with some obstruction and dashing against the rocky sides of the corridor, and sending a shower of crystals sparkling and glittering in the black air. Anon the escaping block comes upon a gentle slope, and with the low music of crushing crystals, slips softly along in its flight, as if mounted upon runners of polished steel, and then with a sudden dip it glides upon a sharper descent, and fairly leaps into the air as it bounds along, hissing over the slippery roadway, and leaving a train of fire behind it, and now it strikes a stretch of way, piled here and there with clumps and blocks of ice. With a mad fury, it springs upon the lesser ones with a growl of rage, grinding them to powder, which, like showers of icy foam, it hurls upon Bulger and me, seated on its back, but some of the blocks resist its terrible onslaught, and our mighty steed is hurled from side to side with crash and creak as it drives its crystal corners fiercely against the jutting rocks, leaving marks of its white flesh on these black heads of adamant. It seems an hour since the crystal monster broke away, and yet ever downward he threads his wild flight, butting, bumping, jostling, veering, staggering along, bearing Bulger and me to the lowest level of the world within the world. Will he never end his mad flight? Is there no way for me to curb him? Must he fly until he has ground his very body to such a thinness that the next obstruction will shatter it into 10,000 pieces and hurl Bulger and me to death? As these thoughts are flitting through my mind, the flying mass takes one last mad plunge, which lands it on an almost level stretch of roadway, and by the different sound given out by the sliding block, I know that we have left the regions of ice behind us, and that our crystal sledge is gliding gently along over a track of polished marble. But mile after mile, it still glides along gently, softly, silently, and then I dare to think that our lives are saved. But so terrible had been the strain, so fearful the anxiety, so exhausting the effort necessary to hold my place on the block of ice and keep my beloved Bulger from slipping out of my arms, that I fell backward into a dead faint as the gliding mass came. At last, to a standstill, I think I must have lain there a good half hour or so, for when I came to myself, Bulger's frantic joy told me that he had been terribly wrought up over me, and the moment I opened my eyes, he began to shower caresses on my hands and face in most lover-like style. Dear grateful heart, he felt that he owed his life this time to his little master, and he wanted me to understand how thankful he was. The moment Bulger's nerves had recovered from the shock occasioned by my prolonged faint, I reached for my repeater and touched its spring. It registered 1 hour and a half since we had stepped through the icy portal of King Galatus's domain, allowing a half-hour for the time I lay unconscious. It showed that our mad descent on the back of the crystal monster had lasted quite a full hour, and reckoning the average speed of the escaping mass of ice to have been 1.5 miles a minute, that we were now in the neighborhood of 90 miles away from the cold kingdom where Galatus sat on his icy throne and Princess Schneebel at his feet with chili chops beside her. It was with great difficulty that I could rise to my feet, so stiffened were my joints, and knotted my muscles after that terrible ride, every instant of which I expected to be dashed to pieces against projecting rocks, or torn to shreds by being caught between the fleeing monster of ice and the gigantic icicles hanging from the ceiling, like the shining teeth of some huge creature of this underworld. But could it be, dear friends, that Bulger and I had only escaped a quick and merciful ending, to be brought face to face with a death 10 times more terrible? Like a bear, because they eat some of you and, try to keep you alive and eat some of you another day. And that it was to be slow and gradual, denied even the poor boon of looking upon each other, for darkness impenetrable was folded about us, and silence so deep that my ears ached in their longing for some sound to break it, and yet there was something in the sound of my own voice that startled me when I used it. It seemed as if the awful stillness were angered at being disturbed by it, and smote it back into my teeth. What are we? This was the question I put to myself. And then in my mind I strove to recall every word which I had read in the musty pages of Don Fum's manuscript concerning the world within a world, but I could recollect nothing to enlighten me, not a word to give me hope or cheer, and I was about to cry out in utter despair, when happening to raise my eyes and look off in the distance, I saw what seemed to me to be a jack-o'-lantern dancing along the ground. Now, it used to be that these were usually made with turnips. It was a strange and fantastic sight in this region of inky darkness, and for a moment I stood watching it with bated breath and wide-opened eyes, but no. It could not be a will with the wisp, for now the faint and uncertain glimmer had increased to a mild but steady glow, reaching away off in the distance like a long line of dying campfires seen through an enveloping mist. But in a moment's time this wide encircling ring of light had so increased in brightness that it looked, for all the world, like a break o' day in the land of sunshine. And here and there, where its mild effulgence overcame the darkness of this subterranean region, I caught sight of walls and arches and columns of snow-white marble. And then, as I called to mind Don Fum's mysterious reference to sunrise in the lower world, I swung my hat and gave a loud cry of joy, while Bulger waked the echoes of these spacious caverns by his barking. I tell you, dear friends, not until you have been in just such a plight can you know just how such a rescue feels. And now, no doubt, you are a bit anxious to know what sort of sunrise could possibly take place in this underworld miles below our own. Well, when you have traveled as many miles as I have, and seen as many wonders as I have, you'll be ready to admit that wonders are quite as commonplace as commonplace itself. Know then that this vast region of the world within a world was girt round about by a broad and placid stream, whose waters swarmed with vast numbers of gigantic radiate animals, such as polyps, sea urchins, Portuguese men of war, sea anemones, and the like, and that these transparent creatures, which had the power of emitting light after lying dormant for 12 hours, gradually unfolded their bodies and tentacles. Portuguese men of war have tentacles? What? And rose toward the surface of these calm and limpid waters. Maybe that's just a phrase for some sort of type of animal. Increasing by degrees the mysterious radiance until they had chased the darkness from the vast caverns opening upon the banks of the river, and lighted up this underworld with a soft effulgence, somewhat brighter than the rays of our full moon. For 12 hours, these weird lanterns of the stream made it day for this netherworld, and then, as they gradually shrank together and sank out of sight, their expiring fires glowed with all the multicolored radiance that our fairest twilight, and the night, blacker than Stygian darkness, came back again, and now 'twas full daylight, and bidding Bulger follow me, I walked in silent wonder along the banks of this glowing stream, which, like a band of mysterious fire, as far as my eye could reach, went circling around the white marble mouths of these vast underground chambers.